Hi there, my name is Cleva and I'm going to teach you to make a little patch from a scrap of fabric that you have lying around your house. Now, forgive me, this is my very first tutorial, so I hope it's easy to follow, but I definitely will try and upgrade it for my next one. Anyway, I'm super excited to get started. This pouch is so easy to make, and you don't even need a pattern to do it. So first things first, we're going to gather our materials. So all you need to do this is a piece of scrap fabric, some A4 pieces of paper, a sewing machine, some sewing pins, button, a ruler or measuring tape, some fabric pens, and an iron. For this one, I would use a non-stress fabric like cotton or linen, and I'm using polyester for my lining. Alright, so we're going to start cutting our fabric. So with this, I just drew straight onto my fabric. So with your fabric laying flat on the table, place your A4 piece of paper horizontal at the bottom of your fabric. And then you're just going to draw around the sides and bottom edge of the page, marking a notch at the top corners. And then you're going to flip the A4 page up, aligning the bottom corners with the notches, and then drawing in the two sides, and then again marking the notches at the top corners. So once we have that marked out, we're going to go to our first notch. Remember, we marked this at the top of our first A4 piece of paper. You're just going to mark 1/2 inch either side of that mark and then 1 1/4 inch in from the sideline so that there's a little square at the side of our rectangle. This will be cut out along with the rest of the rectangle. Alright, so after you've gone ahead and measured your square a few times, you can go ahead and cut it out, just like I'm doing here in the video. Next, you're going to take your piece and you're going to fold it lengthways. We're going to be looking at that top corner. So you can go ahead and pin the two sides together and then grab something round, say for example a sellotape holder, and basically draw a semicircle shape off of that corner. Basically, we're going to be rounding the corners to make the whole thing look a little bit more neat. So once you're happy with the shape of your main fabric, we're going to grab our lining. I simply lay my main fabric onto my lining and weigh it down so it doesn't move, and go ahead and draw around the edge. So this will give you the exact same shape. For me, I'm using a polyester lining. I found this paisley one. It's really, really cute, but I would use something a little bit lighter weight than what you're using for your main fabric. But yeah, when you're happy that you've drawn it out perfectly, you can go ahead and cut it out like so. A little tip is to cut flat on the table so that all of your lines are straight and you're not getting any jagged edges. Okay, so this is the fun part. We're going to make our frill. So with the little bit of spare fabric that you have, you're going to get your sellotape holder and mark a little circle in the middle. And then you're going to start marking 1 inch around the edge of that circle. Now you're going to find a starting point at the circle and taper the line out to meet that 1 inch line. Where it hits the 1 inch mark, you just draw a little cutoff line. This is where you're going to start your frill. Then from there, you're going to start by following the taper line and just mark 1 inch sections, kind of like it's exploding out from the center. By connect the dots, you're going to continue that tapered line around to create this swirl effect. You're going to measure this about 22 inches long. Usually just cut out the outside circle first, then pin it to my second piece, and then cut it out all together. Then once we have the circle cut out, we can start cutting out the inside. And you're going to see as soon as we pull this out straight, you're going to have a frill. Just take your time with the measurements of this. It's a little bit tricky, but if you take your time and measure 3 times, you can cut it once. But do it with a scrap piece of fabric, and if you make a mistake, you can always just remake it. So from here, we're going to place the 2 frill pieces wrong side together. You can go ahead and pin along the long side of it or the outer edge of the swirl. Now I'm sewing this with a 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. So if you look at your sewing machine, you're going to push the needle to the right hand side and that should create a 1/2 centimeter for you. I just find with a smaller seam allowance, it's a bit easier to flip inside out. But once you've got it all sewn, you can take it out, do a little bit of a check over to make sure there's no holes or missing stitches. If you do find a hole, this is your time you can repair it. What you can do is just another straight stitch a little bit further in on the seam allowance. This is all good. You can then head over to the iron. So you want to iron the 2 pieces of the frill flat together so that the seam allowance is tucked on the inside. Take your time with this so that the edges of the frill look nice and neat. Ironing is probably one of the most important steps in sewing. Don't skip it because this will make the difference between whether your pouch looks amazing or could come out looking a little bit rusty. Okay, so now that we're looking good, we can start attaching this frill to our main fabric. So first things first, we need to find our midway point. So you're going to fold your main fabric in half and you're also going to fold your frill in half. Where they fold is where you can find the center. And we're just going to attach these together. You're going to start attaching the inner edge of that swirl to the main body up at the top. You can use lots of pins and a little bit of patience for this. If you feel like you need to practice first, that is completely okay. It might be a little bit tricky, but the main thing to remember that if it is evenly spread across the bag, it will be okay. I also would leave a little bit of a tail that's not attached to the bag of the frill just so you can tuck it in at the end. And we're going to sew this 1 centimeter in from the edge. One thing to remember is that where the needle hits, you want the fabric to be flat, so then when we flip the frill over, it will be looking more like a ruffle and it will be beautiful. And now for the lining. Unfortunately, I did forget to videotape myself pinning the lining, but you're going to pin exactly along where you pin that ruffle. Ruffle is going to be sandwiched in between the main body of fabric and the lining. You're also going to pin the bottom end of the bag along the short end so that we have both top and bottom of the bag sewn up. Once you're happy with your stitching on the top and bottom end of your bag, you can head over to the ironing board. And again, this is really, really important. You want to iron those seams down flat and just take a little bit of care that on the inside the seam allowance is all going the same way and that it's not all crinkled up. The nice part about this step is you're going to start seeing your bag come together, so it gets a little bit more exciting from here. And then with that frill, you're just going to tuck it a little bit out from the seam allowance so that it irons nice and flat and that you get a nice finish to the bag. So almost there, we're onto our side seams. You're going to go ahead and flip the bag back inside out, and we're going to line up our lining to our lining and our main fabric to our main fabric. The flap should be tucked on the inside, and we're going to take care when sewing this that we're not sewing the flap, we're just sewing either edge of it. So you can go ahead and start pinning the side seams together. So you will notice there's the little right angle square cut out at the bottom of your bag. So just don't pin this. We're only going to be pinning the side seams like you can see in the video here. Also on one side of the lining, we're going to leave about a 2-inch gap just so we can flip the bag back in. And remember to tuck that tail to the outside of the bag so that we're not going to see it when we flip it inside out. I also trimmed the little excess bit of the tail off just so it's a little bit neater when I'm sewing it. And back to the sewing machine. So we're going to sew this at 1 centimeter in from the edge. Take care when you're at the joint where it meets the flap, just because this can be a little bit tricky. Try and get your needle as close to that flap as you possibly can without actually sewing over the flap. So at the ironing board, we're going to flatten down these seams we've just sewn. You want to make sure that the fabric underneath the iron is not crumpled up because you'll end up with bad iron lines. So just make sure your fabric is flat before you go ahead and iron it. And then when those squares that we cut out earlier, we're going to pinch them at their corners and pull them tight so that the two flat edges meet. Pin them, and then you can go ahead and sew them at 1 centimeter in from the seam allowance. After you have that all done and you've ironed them down, you can go ahead and clean up any of loose threads and just make your bag look neat before we flip it inside out one last time. Okay, so we're finally here. So do you remember that little hole that we left in the lining when we were sewing up the side seam? Well, what we're going to do is shove all of the material through that lining and the bag is going to flip out and it's going to be a bag. I know that is the best and only way to describe it. At this point, I like to give it another pressing just to get any of those wrinkles out and to make it look beautiful. Once we're all ready, we can go ahead and add our button. Now you can choose how you want to decorate your own bag. You can put as many buttons on it as you want, but I'm just putting one in the center. So you can go ahead and mark the length of the button and where you want to put it on your bag, just so that we can take it over to the sewing machine. Now I will say my sewing machine does work a little bit different than a lot of the sewing machines we have today. Mine's a vintage girly and you have to do the buttonholes manually, so a lot of sewing machines today, you can do them automatically. All you need to do is attach your buttonhole foot to the machine and then place the button in the back of it, and it should map it out correctly for you. So once you have your buttonhole all sewn up, you can go ahead and seam rip the center of it, fold the flap back over, and with my pen, just draw a little mark between the buttonhole onto the fabric beneath it, and that's where I'm going to place my button. Now I just hand stitch my button on. It's fairly easy to do and it doesn't really take a lot of time. Just take a little bit of care to not get your thread all knotted up. Just make sure that you tie off your button securely at the end just so that it doesn't fall off and you should be all good. And now you are the proud owner of a cute little pouch. You can take it traveling with you can give it to a friend. Me personally, I made this for a customer because I had a little bit of spare fabric from a dress I was making for her. But yeah, don't forget to subscribe, and I would love to see some pictures if you do decide to make it. You can also follow me on TikTok where I post some styling tips and some tips for sewing. And if you're really into sewing yourself, I am going to be setting up an Etsy store with some PDF patterns that you can download in your own home, print off, and make some really cute clothes like this dress that I'm wearing. So follow along, let me know what you think, and I look forward to seeing you next time.